All right, I'm ready. All right, my name is Terry Gold. I'm an independent consultant and analyst, and a couple things to get out of the way first. We're going to be talking about some topics around security identity. Basically, how can you subvert security systems to get into corporate facilities, okay? Really excited to be here. Hey, free beer, end of the day. I promise not to put you asleep. Some learning objectives, okay? I want to talk about RFID in the context of corporate facilities. And I know this topic has been done before to some extent. I'm going to address that on my next slide and tell you why this is a little bit different, okay? Learning objectives, you can see them right there. I want to talk about the context of really what the credential is that gets you in the building, what's on the credential. The different context around this presentation is I've been living in this world for the past 7 years, but come from the IT security side, and I know how these building systems work, and I want the audience to understand the context and how these building systems work, authorize individuals, credentials, attributes. That's what's typically is missing from these type of topics. It talks about what the binary string of serial number format is on a card, but without the context, effective penetration testing or deciding what you're going to do really it just isn't terribly effective, okay? We're going to talk about the threats. We'll talk about what else is out there, what's coming, and what's the real risk to enterprises out there. My personal goals, and the reason why I do this, is because this physical access industry, in a lot of ways, has been quite irresponsible. This technology, I'll go through it, really wasn't built to be with security in mind, but now they're kind of talking about it like they're security vendors because they sell to corporate security. People, guards, doors, guns, so we're security. But a lot of them don't really practice security. They don't really manage risk, and we'll get into that too. So I want to go ahead and enable everybody in this audience to really understand more about this. And whether you go ahead and serve an enterprise in a position, you're a pen tester, you're a consultant, you'll be way more effective in helping your customers understand what their real risk is. And then I really want to go ahead and impose more responsibility from vendors out there because this is low-hanging fruit. I know, APT is really higher on the totem pole in terms of threats out there, but this is such low-hanging fruit. I mean, if I can just go walk into your data center or walk into an executive office undetected, what's stopping me? Why not? If it's really easy, right? So that's my personal goal out of this. Talk about the evolution of identity. Pretty simple. Back in the 40s, 50s, everything was paper-based, no photos yet. Then it got into photo ID. Hey, it can't just be a piece of paper in your pocket. Hey, that was pretty cool and groovy. And, in the 80s came along and the 90s and said, well, people can go, the printers are getting better. We can go ahead and copy photo IDs. And, I made, copies of photo IDs when I was, underage trying to get drinks. We probably all have. So the digital, the IDs today have gotten a lot more sophisticated. They're really digital credentials inside of that form factor, but the technology in them varies greatly. It's changing very quickly. There are a lot of standards and mandates out there. And I want to say that RFID gets a lot of bad flack, and there's a lot of bad RFID. There's some very good RFID and very secure technologies out there. We'll talk about that. Why is this important in a corporate enterprise? Because when you go into a corporate enterprise, there are no more keyed locks. Okay, these cards replace keyed locks. Okay, that was the actual reason why these cards were invented for access control in corporate enterprise. It wasn't for security, okay? RFID's been around for 30, 40 years through the military, and then it became magnetic stripe because the problem of I'm an enterprise and John leaves the company or doesn't come back, doesn't return his key. I got to replace locks. Labor intensive, there's a cost, right? If I can go ahead and not do that, then it's a big gain for me. And that's what these cards were meant to do. So security was never, ever baked in whatsoever. We'll go through that. All right. Now, as we get into this, like I said, we've been here before. We've heard, talks on RFID and physical access before. Yeah, we've been here before, right? So here's the thing. everybody knows about this. Somebody went to go give a presentation at Black Hat. One of the vendors basically said, you can't go ahead and do that. We're going to prevent it. You're encroaching on IP. So since we have a patent, it can't really be insecure. You can't really talk about it. All right? So their reasoning is pretty funny, and this is what's wrong with the industry. They're saying the act of hacking it and disclosing it violates patents. Really? They're saying it's not really a security issue. They say, hey, you should be able to catch them on CCTV if somebody's really not them getting in a door. Really, you have 10,000 employees, you know what everybody looks like, and by the way, the guys at the front door watching the CCTV make $8 an hour. You're hiring them, that's outsourced. Come on, right? Then they turn around and say, hey, nobody should be wearing the badge on them to be able to clone it, right? Even though there's no threat there, okay? And, keep them hidden, all this stuff. Can't get close enough to clone, but there's nothing wrong with it. Now, you go to the other side, our community, right? And there's really good comments. The ACL, somebody from the ACLU weighed in and said, hey, this is really concerning. This is kind of BS. And, I took out a few quotes from the hacker community and pen test community and said, hey, same thing I'm thinking. And the reason why I go ahead and say this is because I'm not the only one thinking this. They say, hey, oh yeah, they have a patent. It's a legal hack, it must be secure. And then they say, rather than taking responsibility, they just threaten. And then, now the problem that I have is these companies what's changed since 2007, they're actually claiming to be security companies now. Back then they weren't. It was just access control. So every other word out of their mouth is security this, secure credentialing this, and they're not doing anything different, okay? Now, the additional considerations that I picked out from this community is saying, hey, cloning RFID is nothing new. It isn't, okay? These cards just are passive, emitting just a serial number. That's actually not true. There's more to it than just a serial number in these cards. We'll go through that. Has facility codes, you have to know a format, there's all sorts of things that in order to go ahead and make whatever's on a card work to a system. It's one thing to clone it. The different thing about this presentation, I'm not going to just show you how to clone, I'm going to show you how to mint cards. Okay, so it's one thing to go ahead and clone somebody's card they have, but if I want to go ahead and mint 200 other credentials without cloning cards and just take full control, that's a different story, right? And somebody summed it up best is if we don't go ahead and make a stand on this, we'll just end up being deprecated down to looking at vendor cut sheets and that's that. And that's really not where we come from. To give you an example of that, what some of these vendors might say is we can sell you a highly secure card that has a cryptographic key on it. Trust us, it's secure. Now, the audience they sell to doesn't go through a lot of evaluations like you and I do in the IT world. They don't sit there and have 20 meetings and pick through things. They were on law enforcement together. It's kind of, you tell me it works, it's a handshake, we have a contract in place, it's pretty easy, right? So a lot of the claims are never, ever abated. And it's only now when you have the merging of physical access and IT security through maybe deploying a smart card that has PKI certificates and the keys have to be managed and they're saying, what's on these cards? And these cards are also going to get me into my data center and people really want to look closely at it. And now you have people that are very knowledgeable on the IT side saying, let's take a closer look at this stuff. And it's getting real interesting now. But if these vendors get a free pass, then I'll tell you what happened. What happened recently is they came out with a more secure credential they've been selling for years, charging a premium. And actually, there's a guy out in Germany, Milosh, Mariak. I have the link for the paper. He hacked it, and I was with a company that we knew about this. And it turns out that they were using the same master key across most of their customers. And they didn't secure the key. You could just pull the key right out of the back of the reader. So if I pulled the key out of the back of the reader, just got it off eBay, I had the key across hundreds of customers, thousands of customers, whatever it might be. And this is what happens when it goes unabated, okay? So, RFID, like I said, it's not all bad. There's some good things, but we're going to talk about proximity, which is if I had to estimate, is still about 80% of what's out there in the corporate enterprise. And that's why it's a big deal, okay? And that's why the audience out there in the enterprise has to be aware of it, okay? You can gain access to data centers, executive suites, confidential information. And here's the thing, if you're a pen tester nowadays, I talk to a lot of pen testers, and I say, you know, what do your activities consist of? Some of them say, I haven't hacked into anything in 9 months. It's all social engineering. You know, if I go ahead and gain access to the facility, you know, that's king. I'm good. You know, I put on a hoodie, I blend in, you know, I look under keyboards, under desks, I go through things, I'm good, right? And, you know, people say you can just go tailgate right in, but there are different levels of controls of different areas, restricted areas. So you might get in through the front door, but how do you actually get into the data center, right? How do you get into R&D? You have to kind of be able to do some stuff aside from just social engineering. So when we talk about cards from a technical level, okay, this is really what it breaks down to. It breaks down to, you got PVC plastic, okay? Inside you got a copper coil that's going to go ahead and conduct the data from the field, the energy, the frequency. You have a fixed IC, silicon chip, very small, not capable of really doing much, but storing binary data. And then personalization. So you might go ahead and print on the card, take a photo, visual ID, wear it, okay? Now, what's in the chip is a number of different things. How these cards communicate are by a radio field, okay, a frequency. And I think everybody in the room kind of understands this, but just in case, it's kind of like if I tune into 92.3 on the FM radio, right, on my car, something else that's broadcasting at 92.3, I'll pick it up. So when this card gets in range of a reader, and we'll go through that in a second, basically it's going to power it up and it's going to go ahead and be able to get the data because it's tuned to the same frequency. What's in the card is binary data, a certain number of bits, okay? And there are a different number of bits on cards. There's a lot of different types of bit strings and how they're set up. Format, the sequence of those bits, where they're placed, and what system can understand it is another factor that I find really isn't talked about in these venues typically, but it's very important because if you don't know that, you really can't match it up against an authentication system that's going to know what you did, and you know it's not going to work. Technology, we'll be focusing mostly on what is called proximity, but there are a bunch of other technologies out there, and we'll touch on those too. Some function on a different frequency. There are multiple technologies on that other frequency. Some have cryptographic keys and all this stuff going on that are more secure but not something you can't hack. And then implementation. Sometimes a vendor goes ahead and claims standards, but how they implement it, it's not compatible with different systems. And they do that intentionally. This is an old school market that wants to lock the customer in. That's a lot of the problem why I see an enterprise that has somebody's carrying around 5 different cards with them. It's a vendor lock scenario. It doesn't have to be that way. And then you have standards, tools, and cryptographic keys that kind of makes the difference in that technology bucket. Let's talk about a little bit how these cards authenticate in the physical access infrastructure, because without it, knowing what's on the card doesn't really make a difference, okay? Bottom line is, I'm a user. I go present my card to this reader at the door. Okay, they're tuned to the same frequency. This card gets energized from the reader field that's powered. This card's not powered, doesn't have a battery, so it gets powered by the field, and then backscatter happens where it just blurts it in all directions. It's indiscriminate. It doesn't care. It doesn't ask, you know, who's going to go receive my data when I blurt it out. There's no security mechanism. It just blurts it out. Anything can capture it. This reader's built to capture it. It captures the binary data. Okay, 1s and 0s, great. This reader goes ahead and sends it to a controller. How many people know what a controller or panel is in the physical access world? Okay, a few people. A lot of people don't. When this card is presented to a reader and it goes to get authenticated, there's a building access control system that holds the privileges of all the users and what doors they can get into. That central system doesn't do authentication. Pretty surprising. It's actually a controller that's in the wall. And what happens is When I go ahead and enroll somebody and hand them their badge for the first time, I enroll it, and then basically their card number that's unique to them or unique to their card gets pushed out to this controller. Okay, gets transcoded to hex and gets pushed out to this controller, and this controller actually makes the decision. Okay, yeah.
That standard knowledge is true. Some vendors actually cache certain IDs on the reader in case of a failure.
Mostly in the corporate enterprise, mostly it's going to be at the controller level. That's changing if you're not doing weekend and you're doing Ethernet or something to some extent. But mostly it's caching to the controller and not on a reader, because these users have to go to different places. They have to be provisioned. So in my efforts of consulting with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, I really don't see anything cached to a reader unless it's a biometric or a PIN a lot of times, which, probably not a good practice. What's that? Well, I'm not sure if that would be happening throughout all their readers in their companies, in the company, but we can talk about that offline. It's not a general practice. Because this is typically available offline. That's why you cache it down to here. It's actually not in the reader, and maybe that's getting confused. This is local. So you need a controller to control no more than like 2 or 3 doors at a time. That's the local privilege. These readers generally, I don't know many readers on the market that really store credentials at all. It's all up here. But anyway, what happens is binary in, sends it back to the controller, controller makes a decision, compares the hex to the hex, and there you go. Now here's the interesting part. When I issue a card, keep this in mind. I go ahead and issue a card, I take the next one off the stack, and I go enter it into the system, and I associate it with John Jones, and it gets pushed out and transcoded over to...
Does this have the holograms on them?
These, I don't know, I have so many cards here, I don't even know what I have sometimes.
The smart chip.
Yeah, these have smart card chips on them. So anyway, we'll come back to that. There's a big problem with that. So there's generally 2 different frequencies in physical access, and I've done this down a little bit before I get into some of the more technical stuff. There's 125 kilohertz. Anytime you hear proximity, prox, it's always 125 kilohertz, vice versa, okay? So there's really no deviation from that. That's been around for a long time. That's like still running Windows 95. I mean, it's just old, right? And has no security mechanism built in. Down here, you have 1356 megahertz, okay? Now you can see it's a little bit faster. Why would I want something to be able to go ahead and be faster, even with the same credential information? More data. Why would I want more data? Cryptographic key. I mean, because the key is much longer than a 26-bit string that's up here. And this is pretty slow. It just behaves fast because there's such little data. So this is where the market's been going. And you have multiple technologies that are available on this. MyFair, you can go ahead and crack the key in about 5 minutes if you know what you're doing. MyFair DesFire is pretty tough. DesFire EV1 hasn't been hacked yet. Plaid is something that's open source, that's new. Opacity's coming down the pipeline, which looks pretty damn good. And there's other things, but we'll focus up here because this is about 80% of what people are out there running, okay? So here's the deal. If I just go ahead and clone a card, I can probably go ahead and use that card, that one card, inside of the enterprise. Great, okay? I'm that one person, whoever that card is. But cloning from a pen test standpoint, sometimes I can't really get a hold of that card. Sometimes I get a hold of that card, but I might need different access, or that person doesn't have all the privileges. It just kind of limits you. And I hear a lot of people saying, well, I could go ahead and hook this up to the reader, and it's like, you don't want to be in the front door carrying around something to hack into, a reader. You kind of want to go undercover like you're a normal user, right? And this is where this comes in, knowing how to go ahead and mess around with that string. In kind of layman's terms, and I'll actually show you what's on there in a minute. Let's just say this is the string. It's not, but basically what happens at the controller level when you say, I have a format. Think of a format like a template. I know where those digits go. I know which ones count, which ones don't. So if I have facility code 12 and the card number is 34281, you can kind of see there's a lot of data in there that just doesn't matter, that the system's looking for just for parity. Just to make sure the data is good, just to make sure things are in the right place. And if not, it's going to go ahead and say, no. You might have the right card number, but it doesn't fit with our system. There are literally hundreds of these different formats out there, and that's why when people say, it's a 26-bit card, that's only one. It's only one of the many, many formats out there. That's why you have different people carrying around multiple cards in an enterprise. Now, why is it that way? Okay, here's the deal with the industry. I'm the chip manufacturer, the fixed IC. I sell my widgets to another widget card manufacturer that makes the PVC plastic, embeds the chip, does all that, the copper coils, and then I go ahead and I manage all these formats and for these different distributors. They always sell to a distributor, always sell to a reseller, always to the end user. So there's like 3x markup by the time you get done if I'm an end user. I'm paying like $4, $5, $6, $7, $8 for a card. Nothing innovative about it. And at the end of the day, we all know it's sub-dollar to go ahead and make in China, right? So how do they hold their business together? It's this format, the stuff that we don't talk about. The hundreds of different formats out there that unless you format the binary code in a certain way, it may not work with a different system. Why have they done it this way? What's the purpose? Doesn't serve the end user. It locks the customer in. And if I'm this reseller, if I'm this reseller that's been implementing, for this company for a long time, and I want to serve my customers 3 years later when my customer needs more cards, I want to keep that end user coming to me for those cards. I don't want them to go somewhere else where they can go ahead and get some generic format. So you have all these different varieties of formats just to go ahead and for these resellers to own their different customers, okay? It's a real mess. So when companies acquire other companies, like big companies do, what do? Hey, we had this other building, we need to go ahead and give them another card, or we need to go rip the system out to make it compatible with these cards, millions of dollars. Doesn't need to be like that, all right? And it doesn't help security. So here's a format. Let's talk about formats and masks. Here is a hypothetical example, back to my disclosure earlier why it would be hypothetical, of a 26-bit format. There's 32, 35, 42, 37, all over the place, okay? And like this would be for parity, this would be the facility code, this would be the actual card number, more parity, right? These are the parity strings. And then you have to know the format actually is intelligent, or the controller to know whether the parity should be odd or even and all this stuff. So when we talk about I know the card serial number in a card, and that's all it is, just passive, they're talking about this. If you don't get this stuff in right and where you put your ones and zeros, you're hosed, right? So what happens is this gets loaded into a physical access control system that holds all the privileges, okay? Then that gets pushed out to those controllers in the walls, and then those controllers in the walls compare the binary data that gets passed up transparently, typically from the reader, and makes a comparison in hex and sends it back, right? So we're all good on that. Any questions? No? Okay. So here's kind of a quick demo, all right? See if I can hold. So I have a whole bunch of cards here, and you know what? Most of the time, I don't even know what the heck I have. I've collected them over the years, and so let me just pick a stack here. So these are all different formats. And you guys have heard of the Proxmark device, right? This is not a Proxmark device. This is actually a company that's taken it to the next level. Disclosure, I used to work for them. I helped launch the company. It's not a plug, but it's a really cool device because it doesn't just do one format or just clone what's on one to another. This thing's actually intelligent to read what's off a card, tell you what it is if you want to know. You can see the hex, you can see the facility code, And then you can actually go ahead and not just clone, but you can say, oh, okay, I know what they're doing. I know a facility code. Actually, it's probably better that I just show you, right? So let's take this card. What is this? Okay, this is a very typical card. So put this on here. So I'm just using TerraTerm. And if I go, okay, so I read it. Okay, so this is a 26-bit HID card. You can see the hex. This will actually go ahead and tell you that the facility code is 54. On 26-bit, you have a possibility of 255 different facility codes and 65,000 something, because it's 26-bit, on this number right here. This is 309, a pretty low number, okay? Now I can go ahead and take this card, and I'm going to go ahead and read this card. I'm going to go ahead and hit, I'm going to program this card, so I'm not just cloning at this point. So I'm going to program this card, HID 11, and I'm going to go ahead and verify what's in the buffer. Oh, it failed. Don't know why. Take a different card. Sometimes it's not perfect. It's one. This device is one at a time, but there are devices that you can buy that'll go. Psh. I mean, just if you want to do mass issuance and stuff. So let me go. Oh, I know what I did wrong here. Okay. Okay. So if I hit decode. That didn't do it. HID 26. Okay. Yep. So you can see I set it. I programmed this card to facility code 1 and card number 1. Okay. Now, what's that? No, I hit verify, so they'll verify what's in the buffer after I did that one to the one that I just wrote to. So that's the command. I can actually show you, if I go back to this card, I'll go back to the other card. Okay, that's totally different. That's in the buffer right now. I'll go back to this one. There you go, right? So that did encode the previous time, okay? So now I can go ahead and say, okay, this is a totally different card. I don't want to clone it, but you know, here's a good thing. I already know what the facility code is. Facility code is generally like, okay, I have a serial number of, you know, possibility of 65,000 some odd numbers that I can go ahead and encode, and I have 30,000 employees. Eventually, I'm going to use those up. So sometimes I say, hey, for this facility out here in St. Louis, it's going to be a different facility than the campus out in Los Angeles. I get more numbers that way. It differentiates the population. A lot of organizations make the same facility code for everybody. And there's pluses and minuses to that. I'm actually an advocate for doing that with large populations for a different reason. But what you can do is I can say, look, I got my first card. So I'm not just going to go ahead and clone and be limited there. Now I got my first card. I know what their facility code is now. And I also have a valid number. Okay? So since I have a valid number, these are typically issued in sequence. I can say, let me go buy a couple hundred cards off the internet, and let me go ahead and encode 100 down and 100 up. So I got this one. I could have cloned it, but I can keep going and say, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and re-encode this card and go, let's say facility code up here was 54, and I'm going to go 310. Next card up. There you go. I can go ahead and just start minting a whole bunch of credentials in the organization, show up at the front door with a stack and just see which one's working. Get in through the front door using one, start using other ones. Can I get into restricted facilities? You betcha. And then you start to say, okay, well, I got a pin on my data, you have to do a pin entry. I have a FLIR gun. I can go ahead and wait 30 seconds till somebody enters their pin, walk away, and just aim my FLIR gun right at it. And I can see the red dots and which one's dissipated and see which ones are the first ones, which ones are most dissipated, which ones are the brightest, they're probably the last ones. And you kind of make out at least 3 of the sequence to say, okay, I'm pretty close. I know their credential. I could, totally, put them back to basically one factor, and I can figure out that one factor. Okay? Is there anything else anybody would like to see on this demo? I have other cards, whatever. Questions? The reader is from a company called Identiv Group, division ID on demand. They make some pretty cool stuff. So this is not a science project to give you kind of a manual of commands that you can work with to do a lot of this stuff. And the other thing too is there's different modulations out there. So there's some that use what's called FSK. And then there's PSK and there's ASK, like PSK phase shift. Because when I showed you that wavelength where it looked very linear, that's not really how it happens. That's kind of, we're drilling down. This stuff, it has a phase shifting. It's kind of complex. But what you have to do is when there are certain cards that go ahead and use like say PSK, this is set for FSK right now. There's a command in the device where you can say, okay, set this reader to go ahead and work with ASK now. And then it'll go ahead and work with ASK and you set it back. So it's actually unique in that sense where some other things you've seen out there just work with 26-bit, not other formats, not other modulations. So that's pretty cool. So back to this portion right here. Let's talk about some of the funny things in physical access. Like this industry is going through evolution, but there's still some interesting things I think this community would find, like I do. So it's pretty fun, right? They're all special. When I showed you this card right here, and I went and read it, and I said, it's facility code 54, and it's the card number is 309. Remember when I said the person issuing the card, they would enter the number 309 associated with John Jones, and then it basically gets sent out to the controller, in hex, right? Well, this card actually is printed with 309 on it. Okay, so this is done like 99% of the time in the industry, and why? Because you have people that are enrollment officers that typically aren't very technical, and they just want a stack. They want to take it off the stack. They want to read the number off the card and enter it into the system. To me, that's like, ordering a computer from Dell and having them etch the password right on there, and, well, it's easy. Now you know what the password is when you get it. And so, I've had people debate me on this. I've been to trade shows talking to vendors and like, Prox is secure enough. We wouldn't use it in healthcare all the time. And, it's convenience. It's secure. I'm like, it's not secure. And they're like, oh, sure it is. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, show me that card, put it up to my face, and I'll go ahead and hack it just by looking at it. I'm like, oh, yeah, whatever, right? And then they put it right in my front of my face, and I say, okay, is this card serial number 54271? And they're like, how do you know? I'm like, is that it? They're like, well, we don't know. And I'm like, I can tell you this. Flip it over. It's printed right on there, right? It's like, this is the industry mentality, right? So, just do a time check. So, there's a big problem with that. You're minting this stuff on the card. They're still doing it today. And like 99% of the time, it's just a bad, lazy practice that doesn't practice security, okay? So that's kind of number one. Sequential number just makes it easy to guess. Even 26 bits, you don't have to go totally sequential. If I go up to like 32, 35, 42 bits, I have millions to choose from. I don't have to go sequential. So my ability to go ahead and order cards and just go 200 up, 100 up, 100 down, it doesn't work as well if you spread them out and have a different system in batches, right? The other thing I get is, to tell you a quick story, I do engagements for CISOs, CSOs to go through their, not just their facilities. I do PKI deployment, smart cards, been doing that for years. Telling them how to do this stuff, but going through telling them what they have, what problems they have. And I was on an engagement a little while ago, and I was hired by the CISO to implement PKI smart cards. And this is an organization that I guarantee they have information about everybody in this room. Just the nature of their business, big fish. And so, you know, we did all the heavy lifting around PKI and everything. And so physical security was actually redoing several of their facilities, putting in new controllers, a new system, and they're saying, hey, you know, okay, we're staying with procs. And I'm like, why would you do that? You're getting new cards that are capable of doing cryptographic keys, everything like that. You're replacing all the critical components. You could just go do something else for no additional cost. Anyway, I kept telling the vice president of physical security this, and one day in front of like a dozen people, he looked at me. He was pissed off because I kept hammering on him. And he said, Terry, you got to cut this out. You know, it's not like we're Fort Knox. And I looked at him and I said, shouldn't you be? Just because of the nature of your business, I can walk into your data center and just grab your HSM, whatever I need to do. And so he called the meeting with the CIO, and basically to beat me over the head. And I said, look, I'll do whatever you want. I'm just calling out things you're not aware of that are critical to your business. I have a responsibility. And he said, look, give me the 4-minute speech on basically what's going on here. I said, look, very insecure, went through this stuff, broke it down. And he said, well, you know, is it really that insecure? I said, I'll do you better than that. The VP of Physical Access stood up and said, we're fine, it's not that insecure. I looked at the CIO, I said, can I have your card? Yes. I pulled out a device. At the time, I had a different device that actually just you touch and clone. It doesn't have to plug into a computer. It's very slick. I said, give me your card. I pulled out a blank card. I touched it. I walked out the door to his office, shut the door, gave him his card back, shut the door, and then all of a sudden you heard a beep, a click, and I opened his door. And I looked at him, I said, you want to go down to your data center now? You better hope I don't know what an HSM looks like. And he's just like, this is what we're using in our data center, looking at the physical security guy. How did we not know? It's because this organization's PCI compliant, right? It's because QSAs are not trained. They go through and say, okay, there are physical security controls that not anybody can get into this facility, into the data center. We check that box. They don't know about this stuff. Nobody's telling them. The CIO thought for years this was handled by his physical security group. They know about cards. They know about doors. They're doing it. And so you're sitting there thinking, wow, this is low-hanging fruit for anybody. This, Terry can just go anywhere, right? So you talk about not just saying go in and get the HSM, but the amount of social engineering I can go ahead and do. I don't even, the fact that I can go ahead and walk through the front door and just put on a hoodie. I call it hoodie gate. You walk through the front door, you print up a hoodie, now I'm one of you guys, everybody holds the door, you tailgate in. But now, I not only look like you, but I have credentials that can get me through restricted areas that maybe are just for a few people in the organization. And if you don't have that bar high enough, man, I'm in there doing whatever I really need to do. I'm not just digging through dumpsters anymore, okay? So their excuse from the physical access side, the VP of Physical Access said, well, I'd know if this was going on. How would you know? I look like an authorized user. These systems are pretty archaic. They don't have anomalies to be able to, anomaly detection to basically say, is something really going on here? Do I have multiple credentials? It's not there yet. They're going to be evolving in that direction, but it's not there yet. You wouldn't know. Then they say, well, we have a lot of guards and CCTV. We'd see it. No, you wouldn't. We just talked about that. You outsource it. They don't know what everybody looks like. They're not looking at the credential as presented. Not going to happen. The other thing is people think they have a special format. Well, my integrator told me I have a special format. And that special format, I'm not susceptible to any of that other proximity stuff. Proximity is proximity. It has no security mechanism built in. If I can figure out the parity and all that stuff, and by the way, this company figured out like 100 different formats and built them in, built a library. So yeah, you can figure it out. I've watched it being done. There's nothing special. You're on the same technology. Then you have other companies saying, well, I have special numbering. Nobody else can go ahead and have the same number issued to my organization because when they issue a card, they won't issue it to anybody else, okay? My whole thing is if there's no security built in and I can copy, clone, and mint, you can't guarantee me that, okay? And also, that's not security. I mean, these things aren't secure. Big deal if you only send them out to one person or not, right? People think, hey, I put a tamper on the reader, so if anybody pulls the reader off the wall, the system will know. I mean, the typical infrastructure has something called WeGAN, the wires that go from the controllers all the way back. It's like it sends the ones up one wire, sends the zeros up to another wire, and that's how it gets back. It's not very sophisticated. And they think, hey, if somebody screws with the reader, that's what will, I could climb, if I got into the roof, I'd go ahead and splice into it. Go ahead and send it up. It won't detect that. It doesn't know. I could do that. If the target's great enough, I'll certainly go ahead and do it. Hoodie gate right into the front doors and then figure out where do I go, and if I couldn't mint a card, whatever, right? There's other things when you get down to go ahead and figure out how do you get these things more secure. Well, you get into like adding a cryptographic key, and you get into specific technologies that have like a file system and can hold more data. The problem is that vendors have still attempted to say, okay, how do we go ahead and make that technology our own? Right? So this company over here, this vendor can have MyFair. This vendor can have MyFair. I'm NXP who made MyFair. I don't discriminate who I sell to, but how do I make it different? Well, one of the things I do is I own the key. I'm the vendor. I don't give you, the customer, the key. And then, like we find out, they use that key across every customer. I just won't tell them. Problem with that model is the physical security end user audience has never demanded, no, I own my key. That's the only way I can ensure that it's unique. That's the only way I can ensure that I'm not locked in. And this is a problem. So then you have some vendors saying, okay, I'll let you own your key. But then what they do is they make special tools that only work with their reader, where you can load the key into the reader. It gets really weird. And the customers that don't ask about all these cute things end up getting locked in, and they have nowhere to go, which is most of the time. The thing that probably bothers me the most is in the physical security industry is when they talk about open standards and the use of standards. They talk about standards like, oh, that's our, 26-bit is the standard. From who? Right? From, what standard? Or they say, our new technology that we just went ahead and built. One company built a technology. What they did is they put in basically a hash signature that gets compared to the rest of their products. And if you don't have that hash signature, then it won't authenticate. And they said, well, we're trusted. That's how you know it's trusted. And they say, we're trusted. It's your own internal ecosystem that is not validated with any outside third party. It's not like a public root or anything. So they claim their own trust model. Then they say it's built on open standards. When you ask them what open standards you're referring to, they can't tell you which ones. And it's certainly not open. So it's kind of interesting. But you can do cloning, you can do sniffing, but minting, that's really what we're talking about here. And by the way, if you can find out the key to their advanced technologies, you're back in the same position all over again. I got the key, now I can start minting again. Miloš Mariak out in Germany did a really good demonstration of a vendor's technology where he was able to go ahead and discover the key, and he was back to minting. And this was like the next most pervasive technology out there, saying, oh, it's really, really secure. So protect the key. Where's this going? Cards are really being a pervasive medium inside of different uses, whether it's healthcare, mobile devices, parking, transit, and it's not so much about the card in the future. It's about this chip, right? It's about this smart chip that's purpose built to handle cryptographic keys, timing, and all those things. Okay, and so that chip could be in a smartphone. It's getting built in now. The SIM chip, it's basically the same thing. Now they're going to start leveraging it for other purposes. One of the things that's really happened that's really interesting is the U.S. federal government has started a program that was a presidential directive to strengthen identities called HSPD-12. And in 2005 or 6, they basically said, hey, we're mandating that everybody goes to a smart card chip, a cryptographic secure module, secure element, and it's going to have 4 PKI certificates. It's going to have trust. There's processes in place. Now, it's not perfect. Okay, and I was doing implementations before that, but it's the first venue that has actually went ahead and put some standards in place. What didn't make that standard is proximity. It's not in the standard. You can't implement it. Okay, can't use it. Shouldn't be using it. It's not secure. Government knows that. They knew it years ago, right? So it's all about certificates, public route, trusting the routes on this card. And that's where it's going for transit, for healthcare, storing data, and it's a lot more secure. And it uses high frequency. Okay, so what can you do to go ahead and improve it? I'll wrap this up and take questions. But these companies need to get away from 125 kilohertz. Okay, it's like having Windows 95 out there. It just doesn't have a place anymore. They're glad to sell it because they have a great cottage industry off it. Okay, need to get away from symmetric keys. Usually it's the same key in the reader as the key on the card. Hack a reader, got the key on the card, or you figure out the algorithm and how they diversified it. Not a good situation. Okay, and that's where PKI comes in. Okay, public-private key. Start bringing that into physical access like the U.S. government did. That's the solution. But physical access vendors don't really understand PKI. It's an evolution, okay? Culture from I issue badges and let you through doors to actually being a security professional rather than my business card saying I'm court security, okay? And this is where this audience comes in. You go do a pen test, show them this stuff. Look into it. That'll really go ahead and improve things quite a bit. And, corporate enterprises have a responsibility to do deeper due diligence on how they buy technology, just like IT does. It can't just be your buddy because he takes you out for steak dinner and you have a contract. You got to go ahead and look at all the technical points and validate them. Bringing IT into the project helps a lot because, like, I was educating an analyst last year, and they said, look, I understand technology. One of the main analysts in the IT industry. I get the technology, but I don't understand this stuff. And I said, here's the deal. I come from the same place you are. Forget about every single thing you think you know, and then it'll come to you that this industry is really way more screwed up than you think it is. And you'll start learning how it actually is, and then you maybe help solve it, okay? Need to go ahead and do more standards versus proprietary lock-in. Say no to lock-in. And, leverage what the government's doing. There's a nuance of how to leverage it because the government doesn't really fit well into an enterprise model. They're vetting, they tell you how you need to do things, you need to replace, it's not doable. But I specialize in this area. There's a way to kind of bring it in where it's a best practice benefit for you without getting into additional overhead. And, compatibility. Look for compatibility and push the industry for compatibility on the tools, right? And then if you have to stay with proximity, you can go ahead and do that. You can go do random ranges, disable feedback. So anybody who's trying 20 times, disable that. Make a report so you know what's going on there. Take a look at your log files. Demand from vendors that you can go ahead and do that. So I'll wrap that up. I'll take questions. There's my contact info, and this is actually a really good. It's on YouTube as well, Miloš Mariak. And if you send me an email, I'll send you the link. And if you have questions, Miloš likes to hear from people too. So I'll take a few questions, and then we'll. Yeah.